it's not possible to have different cultures that all behave and execute the same. That's a contradiction, right? So just on that alone, we should admit that we have to, even if everyone gets treated equally, there's going to be different outcomes, okay? In America, we haven't even achieved equal outcomes between different white ethnic groups, which is to say, if you compare, white people of Irish descent to white people of Russian descent to white people of Polish descent, vastly different outcomes across the board. That's because equal outcomes aren't on the menu. We have to focus on meritocratic processes. And so, to your point, at Harvard, when they looked into this, I think in the recent affirmative action lawsuit, it came out in discovery that something like 40% of white Harvard students were either the children of professors, student athletes, primarily at kind of expensive, hard to access sports like, rowing, and or otherwise the children of donors, right? So it actually surprised me, because my assumption, like yours, was that Harvard used to be like that, but they've kind of reined that in to a significant degree. Not nearly as much as you'd think, it turns out. So you're right that the alternative to this is nepotism. And I think a lot of people worry that meritocracy is going to hurt Black and Hispanic students. I think that's at the core of a lot of people on the left worry about this. So I want to give two examples of ways in which it doesn't. In fact, it helps. So there was a study in Broward County, Florida, where I believe they had gotten rid of universal IQ testing for kids. These are, grade age kids, but pre-college. They'd gotten rid of IQ testing, and then they reinstituted it and found that there were a lot of gifted, just naturally gifted, but poor Black and Hispanic kids that were not going to be identified any other way except for a universal IQ test. And my mother was a perfect example of this. She was born and raised in the South Bronx at the time where that was really one of the worst neighborhoods to grow up in the 60s and 70s. And she ended up going to Stuyvesant, the highly selective public school, specialized public school in New York City, on the basis of a test. Now, I can guarantee you, growing up in the kind of chaotic household where she did, her mother couldn't read. Mother had a third grade education, crime all around her, drugs all around her. There was no way she was going to be able to do extracurricular activities. Okay, she wasn't going to be in 6 or 7 different clubs. She wasn't going to be. She wasn't going to have necessarily the best essays written by a committee of parents and tutors. Right. Really, all she had was basically her smarts. All she had was a test of really her inner intellectual potential. The ironic part about all of these other aspects of the essays, the club memberships, leadership positions, is that those favor privileged kids more than the actual test does. And so I'll give one.
Yes, clearly.
Yeah, I'll give one other example of this. There was a very interesting study out of Duke University in the early 2010s where they looked at, they essentially looked at what happens when you admit a group of students under a different regime of standards, okay? And they asked this question in the abstract, because obviously this is true of Black students that quote unquote benefit from affirmative action, but it's also true of legacy admits. It's also true of student athletes, right? So you can actually study as an abstract phenomenon, how do kids fare differently when admitted under a different set of standards? And what they found is that not only Black students, but also legacy admits, also student athletes, which is how they knew it was an effect of being admitted under a different regime of standards rather than, say, racism. What happens is that you had a very high degree of attrition out of the sciences into the soft majors. And how do they know this? It's because they asked all the freshmen on day one, what do you plan to major in? And they got something like, 70, they got a ton of black male students and black female students interested in studying the hard sciences, right? Everyone pretty much had the same rate of being interested in the hard sciences. But what happened? By year 2, by year 3, you found all of those groups of kids accepted under lower standards, dropping out, going to easier majors, and getting superficially similar GPAs. So that if you only look at GPA, you actually don't see the effect of admitting people under lower standards. And what happens is, if that black student that was interested in being an engineering major at Duke, if he had gone to a college, if he had not gotten into Duke, gone to a different college, he might have survived and gotten a pretty good engineering degree at a pretty good state school and went on to become an engineer. Instead, just to survive with the median of the class of kids that were smarter than him, he got some, frankly, kind of BS degree that he didn't want to get. And now he's not even an engineer. So this is a very real phenomenon. And, there's really there's no way there's no end run around meritocracy where you can have your cake and eat it too without all of these other consequences.
So 2 things on that. The first is, if you're a parent, you don't want to send your kid to a university where they're in the bottom quartile of intellectual capacity. Now, so you can imagine if you go to Harvard and you have an IQ of 120, you're pretty smart, but you're not smart compared to someone with an IQ of 145. Like, you're not in the same game. And so you're going to find exactly what you just described. It's going to be a failing game for you, and that's not entertaining. And it's also not good for you. And it's also not realistic in a sense, because the Harvard environment, let's say in the 1990s, because I don't know what it's like now, wasn't the real world, right? They have a tremendous capacity to discriminate because they have so many applicants. And so even with the legacy students, they can pick high IQ legacy students because they have so many applicants. So then you go there, let's say, with an IQ of 125, which puts you at about 90th percentile or above. You're no dummy, but you're at the bottom of your class. Now, you could go to a decent state school and be in the top. That's better for you. That's better for you. Why would you put someone in a position where they're likely to fail and also get the wrong impression of their abilities? Now, it might mean that, if you're going to compete at the upper echelons of any discipline, let's say you want to be a great scientist, you're going to need, all things considered, you're going to need an IQ of 145, and you're going to need to work flat out 80 hours a week. And that's that. And so if you go to a state school and you take a hard science degree, you're probably not going to hit that upper echelon rung. But that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be all sorts of opportunities available to you with that degree. And it's much better to be positioned in the right place. It's much better to be positioned accurately. With regards to your comments on non-meritorious selection. So I did a study that we were never allowed to publish at the Naval Academy with like 4,500 people. It took a long time to do this study. We gave them a full, comprehensive neuropsychological IQ and personality battery. And we could predict military performance and academic performance because we had those outcome measures from the institution. And they preferentially admitted athletes, not least because Navy wants to beat Army in the football game, which is actually not that big a priority when you're trying to produce people who are going to be piloting warships worth hundreds of millions of dollars in very complex situations. And so, maybe the priorities there were a bit askew. And so we had the opportunity to investigate that. And it was clearly the case that people who were admitted on any basis other than psychometric merit performed much more poorly in terms of the evaluation criteria that the Naval Academy themselves had used. Now, the argument from the radicals would be, well, then the assessment criteria themselves are prejudiced. But that argument falls apart if you accept the idea that, while jobs have a quality and merit, like if you're a linesman working for a power company, it seems reasonable for me to evaluate you on how effective you are at generating the repairs that you do generate. Does someone else have to go mop in after you? And then how many of those operations can you perform per day? It's like it's the very definition of the job. And to be anti-merit in a situation like that is to make the simultaneous claim that jobs have no content, right? There's no hierarchy of ability within a job. But that means there's no job, because the hierarchy is there implicitly with the job, right? There's a job when doing something is deemed better than not doing it. And then there's a difference. You know, it wouldn't matter what the competition is. You could have 4-year-olds lay on the floor of the gymnasium and roll horizontally towards the other wall. If you did that repeatedly with 100 of them, you build a hierarchy. Some kids would be reliably faster. And then you could generate measures that would predict which kids could roll faster. They'd probably be older and stronger, for example. You know, maybe they'd be more competitive and motivated. I don't know what the criteria would be, but if there's any outcome, you immediately build a hierarchy of rank, and then you can derive tests that will predict it. That's essentially what meritocracy boils down to. And it's not in anybody's interest to demolish that.